Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 13th of January of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First, we're going to talk about Russia. A very important statement was made by Nebenzia. He stated that Russia will solve problems by military means until Zelensky comes to his senses and agrees to realistic negotiation conditions. This was stated by Nebenzia at UN Secretary Council meeting. So most likely the Russians were telling us that the Russians would continue bombing and attacking the territory of Ukraine with missiles as they did during the previous night. As we discussed during the previous video, during the night between the 12th and the 13th of January of 2026, the Russians carry out another massive missile attack and drone attack through the territory of Ukraine. As you can see, the Russians were attacking the northern part of Ukraine. We are talking about the city of Kiev and the area around the city of Chernihiv, and the Russians were attacking the territory along the line of combat contact, the city of Odessa, the city of Zaporozhye, and the city of Kryvyi Rog, the area between the settlements of Dobropolye, Pokrovsk, Gulyai-Polye, and Orechov, and of course the Russians were attacking the area around the city of Kupiansk and the city of Kharkiv. So the sources reported that Russians during the previous night used 318 air vehicles, including drones and missiles altogether. That wasn't the biggest attack when talking about the number of vehicles that were used by the armed forces of the Russian Federation, but that was one of the most powerful attacks when talking about the damage that the Russians managed to deal to the critical infrastructure of Ukraine. The sources are saying that the power supply situation in Kiev and Odessa is rapidly deteriorating. Let's say Ukrainian energy companies representatives said that before Russia's strike last night, the difficult situation was only on the left bank, but now the right bank is also seriously affected. In some areas, including Abalon and Podoli, power may be out for almost a day. The Ukrainian armed forces previously reported that the strikes targeted the area of the Kiev hydroelectric power station. The sources reported that Russians attacked the power station number 5 of the city of Kiev with 5 missiles, and the Ukrainian authorities are saying that currently they don't know how to relaunch the power station due to the damage the Russians managed to deal. And another important thing that we have already discussed during the previous video is that due to power outages in Kiev and the region, some supermarkets are temporarily suspending operations according to the retail chain representatives. So this is a very important piece of news, and this can lead to completely unpredictable consequences, not for the population of Ukraine, but for the line of combat contact. If Russians are able to create the situation when shops and different malls don't open, this will lead to a situation when the population of the city of Kiev will try to find other towns and cities where they can survive. And then this situation will create a huge gap between the line of combat contact and the part of Ukraine where Ukrainians will still be able to survive. Now let's move further. The missile and drone strikes are not the only attacks that were carried out during the previous 24 hours. Now we see very heavy clashes on the territory of the Black Sea. The Russians improved their technology significantly, and now the Russians are using more and more drones to attack vessels and tankers in the Black Sea. So the second day in a row, the Russians published videos of how they were attacking different vessels to the east of the city of Odessa. So in this video we can see an attack carried out by a Russian drone, and right after this attack there was a very huge power on the board of the vessel. Ukrainians did the same. During the previous 24 hours we received a lot of reports from the area of the city of Novorossiysk. So this is the first statement. Drones reportedly attacked the Greek tanker Delta Harmony near Novorossiysk. A fire broke out on the vessel and has now been extinguished. Another important statement is 2 tankers carrying Kazakh oil were attacked by a drone near Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal in the Black Sea, according to Bloomberg. According to the publication, the oil tankers Delta Harmony and Matilda were attacked near the Caspian Pipeline Consortium offshore terminal, which ships oil from Kazakhstan. So as you can see, both the Russians and the Ukrainians are trying to make the situation when both the Russians and the Ukrainians are not allowing anybody or any ship to enter or to leave the Odessa infrastructure, port infrastructure, or the Novorossiysk infrastructure, which means that if the situation continues developing the same way, most likely in 2 or maybe in a month or in 2 or 3 months, we won't see even a single commercial vessel on the territory of the Black Sea, which can lead to huge problems both for Russians, Ukrainians, and not just for Russians and Ukrainians, but also for the states like Kazakhstan, maybe Azerbaijan, or maybe or even Turkmenistan. So this is the situation. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But as we discussed, this 2026 year is going to be completely different in comparison with any other year that's between the 2022 and 2025. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, pro-Russian sources published lots of very important updates. So this is the video that was published from the area of the settlement by the name of Troitske. The Russians are saying that during the reconnaissance operation, they managed to discover a temporary deployment point of the armed forces of Ukraine with a significant number of vehicles and infantry. And when the Russians discovered this camp, the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory with Iskander missile. The Russians are trying to point our attention to these explosions. So this attack was carried out by the Iskander system, and the Russians are trying to tell us, look at this explosion, the biggest ever, probably that was achieved by a missile strike. So very heavy explosion. The Russians are not saying and not providing us the exact numbers of losses that Ukrainians suffered during this attack, but most likely this is the attack that was also published by pro-Ukrainian sources during the night. So as you can see, several explosions took place to the east of the city of Zaporozhye, and most likely one of the explosions is the explosion in the area of the settlement of Troitske, when the Russians discovered and attacked the base or the camp of the armed forces of Ukraine. Another attack took place in the northeastern parts of Ukraine, in the area of the settlement by the name of Shostka. So here we can see not the Iskander, but Geran strikes. The Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover a temporary deployment point of the armed forces of Ukraine, and then the Russians attacked this territory with a drone. So which means that most likely the Ukrainians were using this territory as launching sites to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, the Russians reported that during the previous nights, the Ukrainians attacked and launched lots of drones. For example, between 8 and 11 p.m. of the 12th of January, the Russians managed to bring down 78 drones that were launched by Ukraine, and between 4 and 8 p.m., 56 more. So more than 100 drones. More than 100 drones were launched by Ukraine just during the previous 12 hours. Another important thing is that during the previous night, we received lots of videos from the Donetsk region. For example, here we can see some consequences of attack that took place during the night. Ukrainian sources reported that Ukrainians attacked the city of Taganrog and several production plants, several manufacturers that the Russians used to repair drones or to repair aircraft and to produce drones. So we're talking about the city of Taganrog. Furthermore, Ukrainians attacked the settlement of Mariupol. We have this video where we can see how drones most likely were launched maybe from the Azov Sea or from the Black Sea. Very difficult to say, but here we can see how drones of the armed forces of Ukraine were attacking objects of energy infrastructure in this area. So lots of explosions were recorded. Ukrainians are trying to, as you can see, to strike back on the Russia's attack on the Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Another attack took place in the area of the city of Donetsk. The same story. Ukrainians discovered some object of energy infrastructure, and then Ukrainians attacked this territory. So as you can see, the Ukrainians are trying to strike back, sometimes not so probably resultive as Russians, but they're trying to counterattack always when they have this possibility. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. First, let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 24 hours, small changes were recorded. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the east of the settlement of Stepnogorsk, and this is exactly what we were talking about during the previous videos. The Russians began advancing further in the eastern direction with the purpose to attack the city of Orekhov. Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian soldiers right exactly at this point, and after a number of attacks, the Russians decided to surrender. So this episode, we will not watch this video due to casualties and attacks and violence, but this episode took place right exactly in this area, so that is why we came to the conclusion that most likely everything further to the west is already under complete Russian control. So these are the changes on the ground, and these are the differences between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 11th of January, this is the 12th of January, and this is the 13th of January. The Russians, as you can see, improved their position significantly, and the Russians continue advancing further in the eastern direction, and currently the clashes are taking place for the territory between the villages of Novoyakovlivka, Pavlovka, and Magdalinovka. So there are very heavy clashes, and the Russians are tasked to take this territory under complete control. This will allow the Russians to create a very powerful foothold before moving further in the eastern direction with the purpose to attack the city of Orekhov and the Orekhov agglomeration from behind. At the same time, Russians continue their offensive operation to the west of the city of Gulyai-Polye, but we see that the Ukrainians managed to slow down the Russians. Now the pace of the Russian offensive is much slower in comparison with previous months. Very difficult to understand why exactly is this happening, but most likely this is happening due to additional reinforcements and reserves that were redeployed by the armored forces of Ukraine in this area. Now the Russians are forced to fight with a significant number of forces that were redeployed by the armored forces of Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dobropolye direction. During the previous 24 hours, small changes on the ground were recorded. Right before we started making the video, pro-Russian sources stated that as a result of clashes, the armored forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their position significantly on the territory of the settlement of Grishina. As of now, we haven't added anything, but we believe that during the upcoming night we will get additional updates about the situation on the ground, and then the map would be adjusted. At the same time, we received lots of reports from the Drushkovka direction. As you can see, the map has been adjusted in this area. This is the situation by the end of the 12th of January. This is the end of the 13th of January. The Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to capture the settlement of Shakhova completely. Based on this video published by Ukrainian sources, we adjusted the map, and according to pro-Russian sources, the Russians improved their positions in fields towards the settlement of Novopavlovka. Here we have additional changes on the ground as well. So we're not saying that something big is happening right now in this area. The Russians are moving, and the Russians are basically just pushing Ukrainians from the current positions further in the northern, eastern, and the northwestern directions. As for the city of Konstantinovka, during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of important updates. First of all, the Russians are about to finish the battle for the territory along N20 and N32 roads. So we are talking about the territory to the south of this main logistic line. The sources, different sources, neutral sources, pro-Western sources, and pro-Russian sources are saying the same thing. The Russians are finishing the battle for this territory, and most likely in coming days, everything between the city of Konstantinovka and the Kliban-Bytska water reservoir would be colored as the territory under control of the Russian forces. At the same time, today we start receiving many updates that Russians managed to improve their position significantly between the village of Ilinka and the city of Konstantinovka. Today, several sources reported that up to 5 soldiers of the armed forces of the Russian Federation were discovered in the southwestern part of the city of Konstantinovka. We are talking about this territory. So for the first time since the beginning of the battle for the city, we received a report that the Russians managed to enter the settlement, and now the Russians either are trying to dig in deeper and to wait for additional reinforcements and reserves, or it's just was another reconnaissance group that entered and also entered the city just for the purpose to clarify the situation on the ground. So, and this is the most important, the first sabotage, most likely in reconnaissance group, was recorded inside of the city of Konstantinovka in its southwestern part. Just 5 soldiers, nothing special probably, but it's just these are just 5 soldiers that were recorded. The real number of forces on the territory of the southwestern part of Konstantinovka is unknown. Now let's talk about the Slavian's direction. As you can see, when talking about the entire line of combat contact and the Slavian's direction, we see that the biggest number of updates are coming exactly from this area. The Russians redeployed huge number of FPV drone operator crews, and now these drones are trying to establish complete control over the territory between the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, the river of Seversky Donetsk, and the city of Konstantinovka. As you can see, lots of FPV drone attacks, lots of episodes of how Russians were attacking vehicles and the logistic of the armored forces of Ukraine through the territory. These territories under complete control. Ukrainians suffer huge losses while trying to redeploy reinforcements and reserves as close as possible to the line of combat contact. And as you can see, we have changes on the ground. The changes are coming from the southern eastern part of the Slavian's direction, from this pocket between the villages of Golubovka, Privilya, Khromovka, Bandarna, Nikiforovka, Dibrova, and Fedorovka Druga. So these are the changes on the ground, and this information today was confirmed by a pro-Russian source. So the Russians are advancing in this area, and according to this report, the Russians managed to take under complete control the villages of Khromovka and Bandarna, and the Russians entered the southern part of the settlement of Nikiforovka, and currently there are very heavy clashes. So the very important battle has begun. This is a decisive battle, because if Russians are able to break through this stance, then the Russians will be able to begin advancing further in the direction of the settlement of Raya Alexandrovka. As for the settlement of Raya Alexandrovka, this is the heart of Ukraine's defense to the west of the city of Siversk. Here we can see a video of how Russians were attacking the settlement with FPV drones. As you can see, there are just ruins, almost nothing left from the settlement, which means that the Russians are bombing and attacking this city with all types of weapons they have, and the Russians are certainly advancing in this area. As for the Liman direction, the most important update is coming from the territory between the villages of Priship and Drobushevo. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see, I don't see anything telling the truth that Ukrainians are saying that right exactly at this point we can see a Russian soldier. So this is a Russian soldier, but I don't see anything. And during the next episode to this video, Ukrainians or the operator of FPV drones of the armored forces of Ukraine attacked this soldier. So this episode was geolocated, and this is exactly the point where the attack carried out by Ukrainians took place. So lots of mappers, and most of the pro-Russian mappers adjusted their maps, they colored this territory, this triangle, let's call it like this, as the territory under complete control of the armored forces of the Russian Federation. But saying the truth, we have some doubts. We believe that this is maybe a Russian soldier, most likely, but most likely this is not a soldier of the regular army of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. We believe that this is probably a sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation that managed to break through Ukraine defense and to answer this point. This is a very important anyway, despite the fact that maybe this is not the regular army of Russia, but anyway, if the sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation are located in this area, this means that Ukraine has even more problems with logistics in this area than we used to believe. So a sabotage and reconnaissance group in this area means that Drobushevo has huge problems with supply and support. The city of Liman has much worse situation with the logistics than it was yesterday. Anyway, we are waiting for additional proofs, for additional videos. If we get one, then we will adjust the map under complete control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. As of now, we decided to keep the territory as a gray zone. As for the Kupiansk direction, one thing is clear, that there is a huge mass in this area, and different mappers show different situation. Today we continue receiving updates about the situation in the city of Kupiansk. The map has been adjusted. We have huge gray zone, so as of now, very difficult to understand the exact line of combat contact in this area, but we believe that in 2 or 3 weeks the fog of war would be revealed, would be removed, and we will understand the exact picture. But according to the latest updates, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions once again, and this time in the northeastern part of the city of Kupiansk, it seems that the Russians are withdrawing their forces from this area. And we continue receiving updates of about the counter-offensive operation carried out by Ukrainians in the area of the settlement of Boguslavka. So during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. The Ukrainians have almost restored complete control over the territories they lost during the Russian offensive operation. It seems that, according to all these reports, it seems that Russia has huge problems in the central and the northern Kupiansk directions. At the same time, the Russians have very strong positions in the Liman direction or the southern Kupiansk area. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but time will tell us. This thing is clear that time will tell us everything. And that's it for today. Military with Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day.